Do y'all send your friends memes with no context whatsoever like I do with all of my friends? I have text chains back and forth with one buddy in particular where we never say a dang word. It's just memes from pop culture that I think make real interesting points. And I know that deep down he's laughing at whatever I send him, but I don't need like LOL or anything like that. You know, it's just meme bouncing back and forth. It's real fun. Memes are kind of entertaining because they assume a shared knowledge of pop culture, and they're riffing on an established story to make comment on other stories or to make comment on current events or whatever it might be. And it's not a new idea. It's just new in terms of the way we package it up. Well, the only stories that you can really riff on or meme on are ones that are great and well enough known, popular enough that people will get the joke, they'll get the context. And so I don't think it should probably be any surprise then that with a story as great as the one that we just worked through, that being Esther, that a lot of people over the ages have memed on it and have riffed on it. And one dude in the early 1900s, a man named Louis Ginsburg, went out of his way to record a whole bunch of the best memes and riffs and legends and bonus teachings and religious fan fiction, if you will, from within historical Judaism. This would be stuff from the Talmud and the Midrash and other places as well. And he clumped it all together in this one seminal work called The Legends of the Jews. That is an awesome title, by the way. I was clearly born 100 years and change too late because I really would like to have claimed that one. That's rad, but only Louis Ginsburg gets to own it. And in this, he goes through and he did his best to grab all of these legends from all of these different sources that had emerged about the most famousest stuff from the Old Testament. So you got stuff about the patriarchs, you got stuff about the age of the judges, the conquest, you got legends surrounding David and Solomon and the prophets and the exile, and then you've got stuff from the Persian era that we've been looking at. And the final chapter of this book is all about Esther. And as I mentioned earlier, that it wasn't hard for him to fill this chapter because of how much riffing has happened over the years, how much memeing has happened over the years with this story. So I've got this book in front of me right here. I've got it open to chapter 12 on the book of Esther. And as we look at some of these things, I just want you to be thinking about, well, the whole conversation that we've had over the last several months, but also yesterday's conversation about the obvious themes of the book, and also about the reality that there are themes that just could not be logically applied to Esther in its original form as we have read it and looked at it. It can't mean anything. It can't mean everything, but it pretty clearly must mean some things. And as we'll see as we look at some of these really interesting, really entertaining legends that emerged over the centuries, we'll see that, they change the meaning of the story. The first of these legends is about the big feast, the big event that Xerxes throws in chapter 1. And in this legend, Mordecai is already on the scene. He knows what's going on, and he already wields a bunch of influence with the Jews. And so he tells the Jews, don't join in, don't be a part of this party, don't eat the food, don't drink the drink. And it says all the prominent men of his people and many of the lower classes took his advice to heart. All the lower classes take this advice to heart, and they flee from Susa because they don't want to get compelled to take part in the festivities. So they bail completely. And it looks like this is part of the explanation for the diaspora and why you get rural Jews and urban Jews highlighted as you go along in the book of Esther. But then it takes an interesting twist, saying that the arrangements for the feast were entirely in the charge of Haman and Mordecai. So according to this legend, they're working together, and the idea is that they'll make sure that the sensibilities of all the Jews as well as all the Gentiles are addressed so that nobody can declare a religious exemption from attending the king's massive feast and ceremony. But then we get to one of the points that is the problem of how the king is thinking about this. And Xerxes issues the order, and he says that You're supposed to do according to every man's pleasure, and that's in the original of Esther that we looked at. But then God becomes angry with Xerxes. So already we see that God makes appearances in these legends and says, "Thou villain, canst thou do every man's pleasure? Suppose two men love the same woman. Can both marry her? Two vessels sail forth together from a port. The one desires a south wind, the other a north wind. Canst thou produce a wind to satisfy the two? On the morrow Haman and Mordecai will appear before thee. Wilt thou be able to side with both?" So there's this really interesting prediction of the tension between the two that's woven in now to legends surrounding chapter 1. But remember, we're looking at these in part because we're interested in how this changes the theme. And this is a very different theme. Now we're into philosophy, and we're into the law of binary opposition as one of the foundational organizing laws of thought and reason. And it's kind of like, what's the Jim Carrey movie? The one where he gets to be God for Bruce Almighty. It's kind of like that particular conundrum, which is a very interesting theme, but it doesn't feel like that's exactly really the theme of the Esther that you and I just went through and looked at. Well, as the legend goes on, Xerxes is boastful in a way that's reminiscent of Belshazzar in the book of Daniel, where he's antagonistic toward God. And he says to his Jewish guests, "Will your God be able to match this banquet in the future world?" Whereunto the Jews replied, "The banquet God will prepare for the righteous in the world to come is that of which is written, No eye hath seen it but God's. He will accomplish it for them that wait upon him. If God were to offer us a banquet like unto thine, O king, we should say, such as this we ate at the table of Xerxes or Ahasuerus." So again, it's super interesting, and it adds a lot of layers of color and cool wrinkles to it, but also thematically it's very, very different because Xerxes, he's subtle when he's the clown king, but never is he openly antagonistic to God. It's like the God of the Jews isn't ever really on his radar at all in the book of Esther, so it's a very different deal. Then we also get some more legends about Vashti's banquet, and it's really interesting. The text presents her as being the daughter of the aforementioned Belshazzar, the sitting king or regent of Babylon on the night that Cyrus conquered things. The timeline here is a complete disaster, and you can tell that this legend sprung up totally detached from any kind of historical records, and they have her running back into her father's arms, but already Darius the Mede has ascended the throne in 539 BC, and she runs right into his arms, and then he, instead of killing her, has compassion, and Darius the Mede gives her to his son Xerxes as a wife. Again, the timeline there, it really doesn't work at all. But for the person telling the legend, the point of all of that is that Vashti was very shrewd, and she knew things about statecraft because her dad was Belshazzar. And she is presented as an abomination as well, because she is presented as going to this party wearing the priestly robes from the temple in Jerusalem. And Xerxes is depicted as using the utensils from the temple in the other room. And then when we get the legend about the fate of Vashti, there's a scenario where Xerxes is like, my wife, she's not Persian, nor is she a Mede, but she's Chaldean, yet she excels all in beauty. Would you all like to convince yourselves of the truth of these words? And all his drunken buddies are like, yeah. And then he says, but that we may properly judge her of her natural charms, let her appear before us unadorned. Yes, without any apparel whatsoever. And then it goes on to say that this thing was actually from God, and that Mordecai had spent a week in fasting and prayer, supplicating God to mete out punishment to Xerxes for his desecration of the temple utensils. And then everything unfolds, and Vashti is deposed because she won't go along with it. And this is presented as an answer to prayer and a providential opening of a door for Esther, who will come into play, obviously, in a big way as the story unfolds. It's very, very interesting, right? The legends are highlighting other details that slightly tweak the thematic underpinnings of the story. Let's do one more, and then we're going to do a bit more of this tomorrow, because I think this is just amazing to see the way people have riffed on it. I'm having fun. I hope that you're having fun with this. If not, you're a really good sport for playing along with my wanting to recount goofy legends to you. Then we get another legend that gives us some more details about Mordecai. This legend seems to be fixing some problems with his ethnicity. He's from the tribe of Benjamin, but whoever wrote this legend wanted him to be from the tribe of Judah as well. And so they make this whole case that isn't in the text for who he was, and they have him being deported by Nebuchadnezzar, which would make him unbelievably old at the time that this all goes down. Again, whoever crafted this legend just clearly didn't have access to all of the dates and everything from this era of the Persian Empire. But they're bending over backwards to make him Jewish and a Benjamite. They're saying his name means more, meaning myrrh, and Dekai, meaning pure. So in this myth, he's representative of that. I mean, of course, my brain goes right to one of the gifts brought to Jesus. I don't think that's in any way what's meant to be conjured by this legend, but it's interesting nonetheless. And then we get this whole legend after that that introduces us to the character of Esther and describes her incredible beauty. This legend says that Esther's mom died in childbirth with her, and that Mordecai and his wife, we didn't hear about Mordecai's wife in the book of Esther, but the two of them took care of Esther, and his wife was Esther's nurse. And I like this line, and that Mordecai himself did not hesitate when there was need for it to do the services for the child that are usually performed only by women. So he cleaned her blowout diapers, the ones where it launches all the way up the back, and it's the absolute worst. And this particular legend about Esther, it really surprised me. It doesn't describe her as being as beautiful as the original text would have you believe. It says, in build, Esther was neither tall nor short. She was exactly of average height, another reason for calling her Myrtle, a plant which likewise is neither large nor small. They're saying Myrtle was another one of her names. In point of fact, Esther was not a beauty in the real sense of the word. The beholder, rather, was bewitched by her charm and her grace. More than this, her enchanting grace was not the grace of youth, for she was 75 years old when she came to court, and captivated the hearts of all who saw her, from king to eunuch. This was in fulfillment of the prophecy which God made to Abraham when he was leaving the home of his father. Thou art leaving the house of thy father at the age of 75. As thou livest, thy deliverer of thy children in Media shall be 75 years old. And then according to the legend, there's this big lineup, and the Medians are lined up to the right of Esther, and the Persians to her left. And even though they were all young, she outshines them all, and she charms the court. But one of the eunuchs is very troubled by her, because she doesn't do anything. She's just almost supernaturally beautiful and enchanting despite being super, super modest. And this bothers him, that the treatment of the eunuchs isn't needed to make her beauty work. I'm not kidding. There are a ton of legends we can look at, and there's just no way to look at all of them. They're all juicy. They're all fun. So I'm going to pick a few more, and we'll talk about what it all means and why the original version is way better than any of these legends, even though they are goofy and fun, next time around. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. We'll do this again soon.